The United States will open the She Believes Cup in Orlando on March 5th against England. So just like the U.S. announced their She Believes Cup roster, so did the English, which means Phil Neville had a press conference. And Phil Neville always seems to have an eye, or at least part of his mind, focused on the U.S. women's national team. Of course, this came up during the press conference. Let's dice up some of the quotes that the English manager gave us. Here's one that jumped out to me, Julie. I think it's becoming a real rivalry between us. The games have been really tight. The games have been really competitive. And the way our players have been talked about now is getting to be close to the way that people talk about U.S. players. Let's go back to the very beginning of that quote, Julie. I know they met in the semifinal. Reminder, the U.S. won and advanced to the final. England did not. Is this really a rivalry?
It is a rivalry. I mean, especially in the last few years. I mean, we go back into the 80s of playing England, and we've played them, I think, 17 times. The United States has played them 17 times over the decades. But when you look at the last 5 years, and specifically the last 6 games, the U.S. has won 4. They've tied 1, and they've lost 1 against England. But they've all been very tight. They've been 1-goal margins in the wins. And as we saw at the World Cup this past summer, I mean, it's a very good English team, much better than we've seen in the past, and they're definitely on the rise. I mean, the results post-World Cup maybe don't show that right now, but this is a team that's on the rise for sure.
I didn't think that you would say England and the U.S. were rivals. Is England the Americans' biggest rival? Because I was trying to think about this the other day, and I don't really know who the United States' chief rival is. Is it Canada? Is it England? Is it anybody?
I mean, here's the issue with women's soccer, right? Is you think there's going to be a rival. I mean, I would love to say it's Canada. Canada's not there yet. They have made great strides in the last 5 years, but no, that's not a rivalry because it's so lopsided still. I thought Japan would have filled that role when you saw the results of 2011 and 2015, but they've stalled as they rebuild with some younger players. But England right now is probably the closest to it. But no, and that I think that's part of the challenge of women's soccer globally is there is not consistent growth with countries. I mean, look at my day. We had Norway, we had China. Where are those two countries right now, especially China? I mean, they've taken such a fall. So you don't see the same funding, you don't see the same investment, and so you don't see that long-term rival on the women's side that we typically see sometimes on the men's side.
Does it worry you, Julie, that the U.S. doesn't have a program that's at least obviously pushing it?
Well, I do think Europe is pushing it, and especially what we're seeing with the super clubs all starting women's programs, that's going to be actually where we see the largest growth. And that is the most concerning, I think, to the United States, because they know that as England clubs even invest more and put more resources behind the women's game, it's growing tons in England. I mean, look at their numbers for the World Cup. Over 11 million watched the women's team in the semifinal against USA, 77,000 at Wembley when they played Germany after the World Cup. I mean, the growth there is fantastic. You're seeing growth in Spain. You're seeing growth in France, of course, Germany still. So I think Europe is where, with the super clubs and their investment in the game, that's where you're going to see the benefits take hold on the national team side. And that's where all the competition is going to come from.
Julie, we started this segment talking about a Phil Neville quote from Tuesday's press conference. Let's continue it further with another different quote from the same press conference. Neville talking about the dynamic between England and the United States. Quote, "We want to be the biggest threat to them. We want to overtake them. That's the aim. Not just to get level with them. We want to overtake them." First of all, Julie, just what do you think when you hear Phil Neville talking like that? Just a reminder, this is an English team that has never won anything. Overtake the United States?
You got to love the confidence he inspires, though. And especially, as I think I mentioned briefly, you know, their post-World Cup run has been less than inspiring. However, they've only won 2 games out of the 6 friendlies since the World Cup. And he knows that they're hosting the Euros in 2021. And so, it's a big 2 years for England, for Great Britain, because it's going to compete as Great Britain in the Olympics, not just as England. But I do think, having said that they've struggled post Women's World Cup, I mean, the excitement you see in England for the women's team. I'm married to a Brit. We were over there Christmas time, and people want to talk about it. The excitement you see, my in-laws are talking about it all the time. The excitement you see in terms of their numbers and their ratings, and whether they can sustain that with improved investment with some of their clubs is the challenge. If they get serious about it, they for sure are going to bring quite a challenge for the United States going forward.
Yeah, on that note, we struggle to really think of a present rival for the U.S. What about a future threat? Like the U.S. right now, the four stars, the 4 Olympic gold medals are the proof. There's nobody really in their realm. Is England then, and you talked about it earlier with all these super clubs, are they the biggest threat to knock the U.S. off this throne?
You know who I also like? Spain. I mean, Spain, think about how quickly they've risen and with so little investment. I mean, that's a country that we've seen what their men's program has been able to do and how good they've been and the type of players they create and produce. And in literally the last 3-4 years for the women, you've seen the youth national teams. They lost to Japan in the 2018 Under-20 Women's World Cup final. We saw them in probably one of the toughest games the United States played in at the Women's World Cup this summer was that Spain game. And they're good. They're really good. They play well. They, as we know, they pass the ball. Now, if they can just create some consistent finishers, I mean, that's a team that I think the United States is looking at and going, they're going to create some problems for the United States going forward.
Spain and England both in the upcoming She Believes Cup. We flashed the graphic earlier that kind of gave the idea of England's history in major tournaments. You mentioned that they compete as Great Britain in the Olympics, and that's a fairly small sample size. But other than that, they've never won a European championship. They've never even made a final, and obviously not won a World Cup. Obviously, they're behind the United States. Julie, how far behind the U.S. do you think England is?
I think they're probably 5 years behind. But again, it's hard to actually compare because the culture is just so different with football in Europe compared to the United States. And so, and that's why I think you see the accelerated rise of Spain. When they actually do decide to invest and put money into the game, there is an uptick that happens much faster than you see here in the United States. They don't have clearly the numbers of girls playing like we have here in the United States. I mean, we have 4 or 5 million girls playing in the United States alone, which has always been our biggest advantage. And yet you're still seeing, because they're starting to invest, that it's happening quickly. So I think they're maybe not this Olympics ready for a gold medal, but I think in that next World Cup in 2023, that England team's going to be a force.
Well, we know who wants to see England overtake the U.S. Phil Neville. He'll probably give us another good soundbite or two along the way as well. It'll be the U.S. and England to kick off the She Believes Cup in Orlando, March 5th, 7 p.m. on ESPN2.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week, subscribe to ESPN+.